Well, by now, most Canadians are aware that Canada's federal court has ruled in favor of citizens who launched a court case against the federal government to prove that the invocation of the Emergencies Act against the Freedom Convoy was in fact done without legal justification. Joining us now to discuss this further is Jeremiah Jost, one of the four plaintiffs who launched the legal action. Jeremiah, originally from the Lethbridge Foremost area, now lives in a spectacular part of Montana. And that's hard to narrow down because that whole state is pretty amazing. Jeremiah,
Yeah,
welcome to Bridge City News.
thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. We could go on and on for hours, but they've only given me 15 minutes. So my first question is, how would you describe your feelings now with a legal victory 2 years after the truckers' convoy protest, with the judge saying the government got it wrong?
Well, I mean, first off, the ruling is no surprise, but I mean, it's 2 years after. Um, would have been fantastic to get that, you know, truth into the public eyes right in the heat of the battle. But I mean, still, hopefully that this ruling can cause a whole avalanche of lawsuits against the federal government because now anyone who was harmed, anyone who had their bank account frozen, now knows that they have that legal confidence to go against the federal government. And even more so that there's still federal judges who are willing and able to rule against the federal government.
Right. That's a very good point because people will now be able to have a different perspective on the charges that were brought against them. What were, what were the issues that sparked you and your wife to drop everything and join the trucker convoy and travel from Foremost all the way to Ottawa?
That one question I could talk on for probably hours, but um, several of them being I'm a youth volunteer and just seeing the mental health of young teens, suicide rates up because of all of the self-isolating. We live in a culture where this young generation wants to be alone, and for 2 years the culture was saying stay alone, save lives, right? Um, and I mean, many other reasons. And I remember the first day the convoy had set out from BC, and all day long I just had this nagging that we were supposed to be on it. And I tuned in after a full day's work, after fire practice. I was a volunteer firefighter in Southern Alberta, and I turned into this app. I believe it was Zell or something like that. Um, and I just remember hearing these little kids all across the country saying, "Thank you, truckers, for going on this convoy so that I can go on field trips. Thank you that I can do all these things and just get back to regular life." And I mean, hearing these 6-year-old, 7, 8-year-old kids just absolutely tugged on my heart. And I told my wife that it was about 11 p.m. at night. I said, I can't take it any longer. We need to be on this convoy. So we washed the car, put some duct tape on it, wrote freedom on our car, packed a few things, and we head out set out around midnight and drove through the night to catch up with the convoy just on the other side of Regina, Saskatchewan.
Well, that's a great story. My experience was that I was covering the activities at Truckers in Redcliffe,
Mm,
Medicine Hat being my hometown. My
okay.
wife was there
Yep.
with me, so we got kind of that first glance of the convoy getting ready to exit Alberta and go on their
Mm,
way. One of the things I remember is the generosity of
mm,
people in
yes.
I probably every stop along the way, and there was a
Hmm.
comment made, might have been by Tamara or somebody else, saying that they sensed that they were collecting the prayers of Canadians as they drove
Mm,
across the nation. Now, there was definitely a lot of media coverage suggesting that once the convoy arrived in Ottawa, that it was dangerous and violent. It was being framed in a certain way. Obviously, the federal government kind of felt that they needed to frame it in a certain way and then invoke the Emergencies Act. This is kind of a deep subject because this was talked about during the commission with Chrystia Freeland.
hmm.
From your personal experience, was there any violence or threats of violence from protesters or truckers?
On our way into Ottawa, the truckers were all discussing the potential threats that could arise, not from us protesters or the truckers, but from Antifa or other organized crime groups. So we were well aware of that, and included with the truckers, there was many veterans who, I mean, I'm sure you saw even Trudeau's previous sniper, protection unit veteran guy was there, and there was so many veterans around the clock stationed in downtown Ottawa to keep an eye out. And we definitely saw certain prompts by the city of Ottawa to invoke violence. I remember one day there was this huge truck bed planted with all these stones about this big, out of the blue, planted right there in downtown Ottawa. And what happened was some farmers with tractors parked their tractors around it to protect it, to make sure nobody would go and grab these fist-sized stones. I mean, you're basically just giving ammunition for anyone to come and start breaking mirrors and glasses. But it was peaceful right to the very end.
Absolutely. One of the common sites was the people who would meet for prayer and communion at the Eternal Flame on Parliament Hill. That was one thing that I remember as being daily, and even hearing people just talk who had no Christian background or Christian experience, they just wanted to go there and be in that atmosphere of that prayer. If we fast forward through those delightful weeks where you and I were both there and had
Yeah.
made so many great friendships and memories,
Hmm.
I'm sure, like yourself, daily I get texts from people who I met in Ottawa
Hmm.
that I never would have
Yeah.
met. Just delightful Canadians
Yeah.
who
Same.
want to seek a better future for the country. Now, so I want to fast forward through all of the good stuff to the fateful days of the police action. And I think everyone watching would remember the horrific video that went viral of the elderly grandmother. She had a walker. She was up in that far corner. I had been in that corner. And
Mm-hmm.
she got trampled by an RCMP horse. And I
Yeah.
understand that shortly before this occurred, your wife had been holding that actual lady's arm,
Yeah.
and you were the one who was filming the event, and you posted it to social media. Can
Hmm.
you share from your vantage point what you saw happen? And maybe fill us in on if you thought that that force was warranted. Was this lady actually posing a threat to the police?
That whole morning, there were veterans walking up and down the line saying 2 feet, 2 feet between you and the policeman. Stay calm. Don't raise your voices. Don't get excited. And right up until when the grandmother was trampled, there was people telling me, who's a pretty calm, reasonable guy, you remember we need to stay calm. But this lady had walked up beside my wife. She had a walker with a little car squeegee and a white shirt hanging down, which is a sign of, we come in peace. Um, and he was just heartfeltly speaking to these people in riot gear. I'm here. She said, I'm here for my grandkids. Um, we're a peaceful protest. We have the right to be here. We have the right to peaceful assembly. And right after she's saying this, and I'm filming it, and I just felt like I was supposed to drop the camera down and show that she's this peaceful grandmother holding a walker. And then these horsemen come running through, and this was the second time that they had run the horses. They only ran the horses twice. I've been around ranchers and farmers who know how to ride, and I tell you, these RCMP people did not know what they were doing. They were bouncing around these horses like they were just introduced to them yesterday, and these were huge horses. Um, and I remember just in the blink of an eye, these horses coming, and my wife and I backed up just like a foot or two. And to my horror, this lady who's in a walker, she's not this athlete who can jump back. She just gets trampled. A gentleman who tried to get in front of the horses and protect her, he was also brutally trampled. And I mean, the horrific part was she could have been dead right there. And all of us watching, we had no clue if she was even alive. So I remember me and my wife just sobbing after for a while. To this day, I can't even watch that video. I mean, you can hear the emotion in my voice and my wife's voice, just sobbing. And I mean, it was horrific, and definitely not warranted. I mean, they would run the horses to gain about 50 feet of progress, and for 50 feet, it's just not worth killing innocent citizens. I mean, this lady was a lady. She was an elder at her Mohawk Reserve. Just beautiful, peaceful lady.
Yeah. And I will say from my recollection of the event, I had been, and I don't know if your video shows the red pickup truck. I'd been standing on that tailgate for quite a while live streaming.
Mm,
And I had this really strong sense that I needed to leave and go back up to our hotel, the Westin,
mm.
and we had that camera that was shooting down on that intersection. And
Oh yeah.
no sooner had I arrived, we had the windows open. I arrived inside the room, and Naveen, my coworker, was recording. No sooner had I walked up to the window and I saw those horses, and I can still to this day hear the screams
Mm,
from that lady that went up
yeah.
26 floors
Mm,
straight up. And I don't know, maybe
mm,
it was an offering to the Lord, not sure, but that
mm,
scream was something I'll never forget. And I was shocked
yeah.
that I heard it so loud and so clearly.
Mm,
But let's move on from that. I want to ask you about the federal judge, Richard Mosley.
hmm. Yeah.
So he had started that he had stated rather that the charter rights were indeed violated. What
Hmm.
did you observe? What were some of the more serious violations of our rights that you saw?
That's a great question. And even though we did kind of get an overall win in that court case, there were many Charter of Rights that weren't even touched. And us four people who did sue individually, there was two veterans, there was one ex-police officer, and then myself. And two of them had their bank accounts frozen. Myself and another did not. And if we what would have been awesome is if we had had somebody who was beaten, because there was so many people who were pulled behind the lines and beaten. And I mean, I've got the Charter of Rights right in front of me with a few highlighted. And I mean, it clearly states you have to be tried, and we all have the right not to be brutally treated or beaten. And that was happening left, right, and center during those 2 days, that Friday and Saturday. I mean, people were getting pulled behind the line, and it's actually a tactic used. It's called snatching, where you get the more violent guys who run out, grab a random person, pull them behind the riot line, and they would just start beating them with the back of the gun. They would put them in a truck, drive them an hour away, drop them off, and say, "It's your lucky day. We're dropping charges." When there was no when which is also a part of our Charter of Rights, is you have to be tried, and there has to be a specific reason. And they were just saying people were being picked up because of mischief. Well, is mischief a reason to get butted and beaten and then dropped off in the cold somewhere? And they made these people without jackets. I mean, they would have their jackets ripped off them. They would stand for an hour or two in a processing line before they were released without any. And so all these people coming back from Ottawa don't know it, but they have total legal standing to sue the government for the way that the police treated them. And I think that's a huge. I was talking with my lawyer, one of my lawyers yesterday for about an hour, and she thinks that that's probably one of the biggest things we've missed out on in this whole case. I mean, we have to hold the federal government responsible, but we really need to hold our police responsible. These people were paid, time and a half, five-star dining, beautiful hotels, to come out and beat on these peaceful Canadians. And they need to be held accountable as well. And I mean, I have several RCMP friends myself, being a first responder, and they're not all like that. I'm not anti-police. I've got many friends. I spent lots of time in Ottawa talking to the first responders. They were very friendly and polite there. But that day, that Friday and Saturday when they were cleaning out, that
Yeah.
was a whole different breed of RCMP.
Well, it is very hard for us not to paint them all with the same brush.
100%.
It's very hard to have that mindset towards them. to divide the two of them. And speaking of division, are there any thoughts on what needs to be done to bring unity among Canadians, even though there may be things that we won't agree on?
Absolutely. I think it has to start right at the top. I mean, when you look at the way that Trudeau was speaking about the unvaccinated or minority groups, I mean, to say that a people group is taking up space. I mean, there's a few other dictators in history who we could liken that kind of speech to. And I think when our leaders and when our news, big pharma, when they're speaking incredibly divisive language against people groups, I mean, I had friends in my small community who said, absolutely do not come anywhere near me, do not come anywhere near my grandparents because you're going to kill them. I mean, there was such hatred. And I mean, that came from so much propaganda from big pharma and these news stations, right? Um, and thankfully, over the past 2 years, that has died down a little bit. I mean, there's been so many lies now told, like if you get vaccinated, you're not going to be a carrier of the disease. Well, that's wrong now. We all know that. But there still definitely needs to be some more written justice on and accountability. I always say those who forget history are bound to repeat it. And I think it's so important that we kind of don't forget what happened and the way that people were, um, spewing so much hate.
Yeah, and misinformation. Uh, Thank you. We really appreciate your courage, and thank you for speaking out on these issues, Jeremiah.
Hmm. Absolutely.
It's our pleasure to have you on. Jeremiah Jost is one of the 4 plaintiffs who successfully challenged the federal government in federal court over the legality of invoking the Emergencies Act.